let's get started. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask one question and we'll just go right down the row so everybody can find out who you are and a little more about you. And then I'll ask a few targeted questions and we'll go to general questions and then to the students in the audience. Sounds good?
Great.
Sure.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
So just generally to kick us off, tell us with some brevity, since there are 4 panelists, how you got started. Like, what's your origin story? How did you get to where you are now?
Oh man, it's terrifying. It's a little bit
This
of.
is Nathan.
Hi,
Nate.
guys. I'm Matt. Hi. So I think for me it's sort of a cliche and chaos simultaneously getting started. Starts, I guess, with film school. I graduated film school and I moved to LA. Interested in doc always. But I moved out with a community of filmmakers out there who were all sort of simultaneously getting their start. So we immediately started freelancing, doing the sort of stuff that everybody here probably does or has done to some degree. Making short films, short docs on the weekends, but I found some traction freelancing, mostly with doc houses. That was sort of where I started to find just some stability, steady pay, steady paychecks, PAing, and then field coordinating, and then producing. And then sort of simultaneously in tandem with that, I was, like I said, doing short films, projects, and these two things kind of coalesced around the 2016 inauguration. And I did it just out of interest, out of, again, sort of, I don't know, an interest in self-harm. I flew out to DC to do a short verite doc on the street protests. And that was the first time that the chops that I learned just kind of getting started in production coalesced with the directing. And it played international festivals and it kind of got me started. And so, yeah, from there I just kept pushing and opportunities presented themselves.
Thank you. And Bennett.
Yes, I'm actually an SVA alum. And I learned in SVA what a producer was and kind of what you can do with what I call a very specific brain disease of being a producer when you really can't turn off making a plan constantly. And my first job out of college, I kind of tripped and fell into nonfiction filmmaking at a production company out of college. I applied to every single production company. I was really into getting to the root of how things get made. And I thought I PA'd a lot, but being in a company and learning how things got made, my first job was a documentary production company that produced a lot of commercials to fund their docs. And that was kind of how it all started.
Okay. And Michael.
So let's see. Well, I was always into making documentary films even when I was in high school. So that's really when it started, but I won't take you through the whole arc. So out of college, it was around the war, around the time of the Iraq War, and I was working with activist groups, and they needed somebody to film their protests. So I really started there and was filming a lot of protests and turned that into a documentary that was able to, be screened nationally. And from there, I realized that making a protest film wasn't going to make me so much money. So I started teaching, taught for 10 years. And while I was teaching, started doing film on the side. And I made a short film that also got into a bunch of film festivals. And from there, decided that I was going to leave teaching and do film full time, and kind of fell into producing. I didn't really know it was a role that I wanted to do or I was able to do, but I wanted to see films that I love get done, documentary films that I love get done, and so I was just somebody who was like, "You need help? I'll help." And from there, I started getting hired as a producer, and yeah, been making films ever since.
What did you teach?
I taught social studies, and I also taught film.
Cool. High school students?
High school students, yeah.
Cool. Thank you. And Eric?
So I studied communication in undergrad, and then went to grad school at Boston University for a degree in broadcast journalism, thinking that I wanted to be on air. And as soon as I got into BU, I was like, oh my God, I think we had to do like stand-ups and stuff, and it was horrifying. And I was like, terrified. I was like, and one of my professors was like, you could be a producer. And so I became a producer, spent 15 years at ABC News, I spent most of my time there at Nightline doing a lot of short form work for that program. And then worked at GMA, worked at 2020, doing full hours, left there having run Soul of a Nation. And then I started 3 years ago at CNN, kind of building their internal original series team. And so I've been fortunate enough to stick around there for a while.
So I'm going to ask you each questions, but I'm going to do it in reverse this time. And start with you, Eric. Tell us about how it works. Your fellow panelists are all independent filmmakers, but you actually work with a team of journalists. How does that work? How is it organized? How do you determine what stories you're going to tell? Just so everybody knows the difference.
Yeah, so I've only ever worked in sort of corporate environments, which is an interesting way to learn how to be a journalist, because you are looking at your viewers. When I was at ABC News, it was owned by Disney, and so it's a job. You're trying to make content that both is interesting for the viewer, but also is journalistically important, etc. And at CNN, very similar. It's based around breaking news. It's based around people that come to CNN are usually in the dentist's office, usually at home. They want to see what's going on right now. How do you make documentary work within that space? We've made the argument that people want to see content beyond what is just going on right now. And oftentimes, the stories that are breaking right now will turn into documentary work in the very near future. And so that's basically what my job is I have a team of producers, PAs, I have 2 DPs, 2 editors, and a production management team. And we think of ideas, develop them. I pitch them to my boss. She says what we're kind of interested in, and then we pitch it to the president of the organization. And that's been pretty much the way my job has worked, is just sort of using all of the ideas in people's heads and trying to collaboratively find content that the audience the audience will not only want to watch, but learn something from. We're in a time with a lot of nuance, a lot of specificities that you really want to focus on and people want to drill down into, and we try to tap into all of that. So that's basically the difference, I think, a little bit in what I do, is that there's a lot of pitching, a lot of lawyers looking at things on the back end. I can get into that later. And I'm sure these guys have the same experience. But you're pitching a lot. It's a lot of ideation and collaboration.
And how many docs do you guys do a year?
We try to do about 16 hours a year. And so last year we had a 4-part series on Martha Stewart that we did. We have the clip of New Orleans that was in there. That's for a show we call TV on the Edge that's airing this coming Sunday night at CNN. The episode is about the Kanye moment where it broke the telethon. And we kind of look back at the nuances of that moment in the middle of hurricane season and about how that was one of the big moments that launched this idea of Black Lives Mattering, etc. And we don't let Kanye off the hook, to be said. It's about 16 hours per year, and then we're also experimenting with some digital work as well.
Okay, thank you. And Michael, in your world, independent film, a producer is different than a producer that we just heard, a totally different role. But in your world, also, a producer is different than a director.
For sure.
So tell us the difference between the 2 kinds of producers versus a director, but also how those roles apply to your most recent project, The People's Way.
Sure. So So I also direct too, and you saw Play Like McCoy is a film that I'm directing. So I have a sense of like certainly what it looks like on the director side and the producer side. As a producer, you know, your role is essentially your director is going to tell you what they want to do. And then, you know, in independent docs like I do, you have a pretty small team, and so you're wearing a lot of hats as a producer, and so you really have to figure out what the how is. Like, if your director wants to do this, how are you going to do it? How are you going to fund it? Who are you going to hire? You know, where are you going to shoot it? All those things, and you know, it's what I love about it is that it has. You get to like, this sounds a little selfish, but like you get to be a part of a lot of projects without taking on the burden of it being like your baby. Whereas in the director's role, oftentimes, you know, you're the artist, and so it's like if it goes down tragically, you know, it's kind of like you feel it, you know, and so. So that's really like one of the things I love about producing is I get to do all these different projects and I play all these different roles. And you kind of need to know a little bit about everything. Except for the law, you need to know need to know a lot about that.
Yeah.
A lot about that. And so what I love about my most recent project that I'm working on called The People's Way is essentially you saw a clip of it. It was a shot of what's called The People's Way, and essentially when George Floyd was murdered, the space that he was murdered around was reclaimed by the community, you know. And so this story follows 3 Black women who are activists and part of the community, and how they healed through the pain, but also reclaimed their space and fought for justice. And it takes place in a 5-year period. And yeah, it's like it's really exciting to tell this story. We're coming up on the 5-year anniversary, and you know, it's like we all have sort of short memories, but that was the largest national protest ever in the U.S. Right? Like that's 20 million people who protested around. I think they said it was like 40% of all counties in the U.S. had a Black Lives Matter protest, you know, and so yeah, I'm just excited to tell that story and do it at such a time as the 5-year anniversary that's coming up next year, and that film is having its world premiere soon, but I can't say it because it hasn't been announced yet. But it will be announced tomorrow. So if you think The People's Way and then just look it up, you'll see where it's gonna show. So.
Good luck. I can't believe it's 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fast. Thank you. Bennett.
Yes.
So your project is different than the projects we are talking about, and I'm referring to couples therapy.
Mm-hmm.
It's an authentic, intimate look at relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Let's dig into specifically that kind of project. How did you deal with the challenges and the opportunities of working on a project with people around the most intimate, complicated, difficult parts of their lives? I mean, we all have relationships, so we know what that's like.
I am very fortunate that I came to direct and produce Couples Therapy season 3 and 4. Mm-hmm. So there was already kind of a language that was established in terms of what people could expect, what the show looked like, kind of what the experience was going to be like. But I found that I think the show, we have a phenomenal casting team. And the thing that we weed out first is anyone that wants to be on TV. Like that's just not interesting. And for us, I think that people, when you work on a documentary, you never have the guarantee that the participants that are making it with you will be better at the end, right? And as producers, it's kind of our responsibility to do everything in our power to hopefully make sure that no one's going to be damaged by the process. And couples therapy is that unique project in that no matter what happens to these people in their relationships, they're getting 8 months of free therapy once a week with a phenomenal therapist. And I think that that is a huge draw for people kind of in opening up. The people that we pick to be on the show, and we pick 6 to 8 couples that we film with for 6 to 8 months without knowing who's going to make it on the show. Really, it's all about the process of the therapy. Are people that are really fighting for their relationships. And I think that that like purity in the intention is kind of not easy to identify, but it's kind of right on the surface. So I think people want to do the work, and I think it's whether or not it's going to be on TV is also kind of a draw, because whether or not they're going to make it on the show, they are going to get the
So
full
let's
run of
dig
therapy.
into that just so everybody knows. Some of the couples don't make it on.
Mm-hmm. I would say half of the couples that we film with.
And how do you determine which ones do and which ones don't?
It's really interesting. I think as a director on the show, it's so similar to my work in producing any feature doc. It's kind of like holding those relationships and kind of seeing how stories are kind of developing over the course of production. And so that's why we film with so many couples and see kind of what stories are going to be complementary to each other and make a compelling season.
Fun.
So fun.
So fun. Nat. So let's dig into something totally different. You worked on stories of a teenage Ukrainian, or plural, refugees.
Yeah.
Teenage Ukrainian refugees. When you're out in the field and things are happening that fast, and you don't have a team like CNN's doc team, and you're just out there on your own, how do you fact check? How do you make sure that everything that you're doing is accurate and what people are saying to you and where they're steering you to as it's happening? Because you can't go back and check it later.
So with the Ukraine film, what was important to understand is that we walked in. That was a Paramount production, so we did have. It was lean and it was a verite film, so it was very much a skeleton crew, Ukraine border, in a conflict zone, working with refugees, all these things. But we did have prep time. We did have a very lean casting process where we had sourced subjects who were going to give us the access that we needed, a sort of really stripped down version of what you guys have done. And so we did sort of walk in with that prep done. So there was an understanding of exactly what the scene work was going to be. What do we need to capture? What are the objectives of this moment in time? So it wasn't quite as much like, when you're in whether it's a protest or in an actual combat zone itself. Mostly with that film, we were in, all right, this is an environment that we understand. We have at least a broad understanding of what's going to happen. These are the kind of scene necessities that we need to execute. And then in terms of it's an interesting question, whether, from a perspective of bias, from a perspective of intent in that environment. The goal with that film was always, it's very much a piece of humanist filmmaking. So my perspective was, as long as we were working with Ukrainian crew, which we were, regional people across the board who really had skin in the game, who had relationships on the ground, who themselves were refugees. A lot of something that people don't fully understand about Ukraine is that it was a completely, it remains, I should say, Jesus. Forget about developed, it's a cosmopolitan place. It has a robust film industry. So a lot of the people that I encountered in Poland and elsewhere were Ukrainian filmmakers, DPs, shooters, producers. So there are people who are eager to tell their stories, and bringing that crew into that environment allowed people to really open up. And so we were able to kind of get those stories and get that access. When you're dealing with people who are in such a vulnerable position, really taking your time in talking to people, really making them understand that this is a camera and that you understand it's a vulnerable thing to speak to a camera. And we had people who said, like, we'd love to talk to you, but we understand that this camera, the media that you're capturing could be seen in Russia. And we have relatives in Belarus or near the Russian border where they could be tortured and killed. So we'll chat with you, we'll give you ideas and advice, but we don't want to be on camera. We can't talk to you to that capacity. So
To protect them.
To protect them, yeah. I had a conversation with a really interesting guy. He had worked at The Hague and had been a part of the prosecution of the Bosnian war crimes committees. He said, always remember that what you're doing in that zone, refugee zone, is you're taking testimony and you're talking to people who'd seen things, but they'd seen crimes in a lot of cases. And so remember that what you're documenting there's an evidentiary value to it. So always try to put their experiences in a very central space and to tell that as accurately and responsibly and compassionately as possible. So
And then going back to fact checking, I'm assuming you do
Fact-checking,
you
right.
do another round of evaluation when you're back and you're looking at the footage.
Sure.
And
The fact checking for that film, always robust and complete fact checking. My goal also is always to, in this film and in all of my films, when it's very sort of character focused and it's about living it's a verite film, and it's verite, for those of you who don't know, it's on the ground, fly on the wall cinematography where you're really kind of plunging yourself into the story. When you're in that perspective, my goal is to be as observational as possible and to really live with their perspective. So the fact checking is, insofar as presenting facts and presenting things, absolutely robust, but also sometimes when their perspective is biased, the story becomes their perspective is biased. So what do you do with that? This person thinks this. The story then becomes about why this person may think this. And so then your job as the filmmaker is to interrogate that idea. So
that's great. So a general question for all of you. At this stage of your careers, looking back, what skills do you think are key to becoming a documentary filmmaker? What advice would you give, and what to do?
Take tons of punishment constantly and live with anxiety and depression at all times of every day.
Anxiety is a skill.
I think the most useful skill that comes to my mind is being willing to really put yourself in a new place, in new conversations, and interact with people and environments that you would never otherwise. Be okay with the idea of, if a story calls for it, going there and talking to a person that you never would feel necessarily comfortable talking to, or think to talk to, or we get focused on geopolitical events and we take the reportage of anchors and we take political analysis. We take these things into consideration, but what we often don't do is go there and talk to people. Mm-hmm. And what I've found is that if you do that, people will talk to you. And that's the biggest, confronting that fear, I think, and being okay with, trust your prep, trust your production, trust your work, watch your back, but go. And if you can, and talk to people.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think something that I think about a lot is as a journalist, something that journalists, especially today, get a bad rap for, or something to remember. I wish I just reminded myself of this over and over. Journalism is a practice, just like any other profession, law, physician. You practice it. It's a science. You have to practice the work of being unbiased, taking your feelings out of something, being able to, in a moment, look at something very clinically, being able to hold a camera and make that person you're across sitting from you forget that you're holding a camera. It's something you really have to practice outside of what you do every day. Some people have a gift for being able, I think all of us wouldn't be up here if we didn't love talking to people. I love talking to people. It's so fun. I love getting to know people. Super fun. But when you're working and you're trying to get a specific thing out of the story, you are trying to get that person to unfold and get to that truth. I thought you said it excellently. Our jobs are to make space for people to be as truthful and honest as possible and be their most be the best self or whoever they are, be it in front of your camera, in front of your crew with all these lights and this, that, and the other thing. And you can get lost in that if you think it's just like, oh, it's just an interview. People who practice journalism as a profession, you've got to put yourself in situations that you think are going to be really uncomfortable for you. And every time I've done that, I've walked out on the other side of it and felt so, it makes you as a person feel better when you walk into a space where you think you're not going to be welcome or they're not going to talk to you, and they do.
Yeah.
And they give you something that you didn't thought. It's always, people are so interesting. And so it's just something I would just remind you to, it's like, remember the technical parts of what we do in this profession. It's a real job, you know?
And Bennett and Michael, I mean, what do you think are the really critical skills to being a documentary filmmaker?
I mean, it's like the dumbest thing, but I think that being flexible, like I think that if we could go back 14 years from now and tell my parents that I'd be making documentary films and that I was going to be a very flexible person, they would all have like a good laugh. I think because part of a producer is kind of allowing for all of the story to unfold and kind of building the container to allow it to morph no matter what. I think making a call sheet for a documentary is the most hilarious thing of like all time. And you just have to like accept that you're just going to be pivoting a lot and that you're never going to be able to figure out what's going to happen. And if you're doing this story and then this is the one that's more interesting, you're just going to have to make it happen. And I think that you have to do that a couple times so you can convince yourself that that is going to be okay, right? Because it's so scary, especially as producers, because we want to plan everything and we really want that container to be pretty rigid. But I think just knowing that you have to be prepared for anything and still kind of hold it together when it's not going the way that you think it's going to go.
Absolutely. I mean, I think everybody said it. I would add having empathy, having the ability to listen. I mean, I think you made a really good point around like the camera operator has to be trusted in the space. And, you know, most of my crews are quite small for the reason because we're trying to gather intimate stuff. And like, if you have 10 people in the room that aren't really that are kind of standing around, that can like have an effect on that human connection. And part of what I look at when I'm hiring folks, I don't care if you're a PA, if you're a camera operator, if you're a sound person, you still need to have that empathy because there's going to be all this time, in terms of like, you think it's going to be a 2-hour shoot, ends up being a 5-hour shoot. And those people are going to be interacting with the space and the community and the folks that are there. And so when I hire, I'm looking for people not just to be technically good at your job, but to be able to actually be in a space and feel comfortable and leave your biases at the door. And, and all that stuff is super important, especially when you're talking about marginalized communities, if you're talking about sensitive topics. It's like you have to have people that just feel that can walk in a room, can feel a certain way to the subject, to the people you're interviewing, and automatically make everybody comfortable. So,
thank you, Eric. 16 hours a day is the final product, but there are hundreds of hours that are shot to make those 16 hours. How do you know when something's done? Like when you've got everything you need to make this project? And I ask because I've worked with filmmakers who just never know when it's done and they just go.
No, you can keep working. You can keep working on stuff forever. Like I will watch this TV on the Edge episode on Sunday and see something on it and be like, oh my God, why did I like some little gnat pop or some move on a photo or something? I mean, I think for something I became very accustomed to with my training at ABC News was deadlines. And there was I worked for a live, Nightline is still on. It's on at 12:35 every night on ABC News. Great program still to this day. That show is on at 12:35 every night. And so you have to finish. And sometimes you have worked on something for a longer, you have a full show that you've worked on for months when I was at ABC News, and you're crashing it together because of some news peg that makes sense. And at some point you just have to, the biggest thing is just making sure everything's accurate. You cannot have things that are wrong factually. And at CNN, we have the same mindset of you get, for the producers on my team, you get typically 12 to 14 weeks of edit. That means 12 to 14 weeks of edit. 1/3 of the way through, that's when I want to see a rough cut. 2/3 of the way through, that's when my boss wants to see a rough cut. And then as we get closer, the big boss, they see the fine cut. We get everybody's changes in. Every now and then you make exceptions, but there's a time is money, and we have a very finite budget that we cannot go over. So the timing of it just makes it easy to, not easy, but forces you to stick to it.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes before we have to go to Q&A, so I'm going to just start asking directed questions. But Nat, I'm actually going to ask you the same, I just said different questions, but I'm going to ask you the same one, because I think for you, knowing when you don't have the same kind of deadline pressure necessarily with all of your projects, when do you know you've shot enough and you've captured all you need for a project?
Super tricky. So with the Ukraine film, because it was exactly the structure that you described. We had a number of different levels of executives who were asking for cuts, which was actually really helpful, because holding yourself to that deadline. It was also, we had it was a very structured project. We had a month in the field. It was what it was. We walked away. The stories were really clear also. By no means did we walk away with the exact film we set out to make, which you shouldn't. When there's some quote about, if you start a film and walk away with the exact film you set out to make, then you weren't listening on the way. I think that is true for the most part, but so true. The stories, right? But the stories did kind of just tell themselves in the field. So we walked away. We got, the deadlines were helpful. The one that I'm on right now, we shot 700 hours of media.
700 hours. That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, chill. It's very chill. So we got it in. What we did, to answer your question a little more succinctly, we were in tandem shooting and editing. So as the stories were unfolding, I had my editor full-time cutting. So he was cutting as it was coming in, and he was making choices based on what I was flagging from the field. So by the time we were done shooting, and we got to this point where it was all right, we're done for now. We're going to pick up with our subject in a month and see where they're at. It became a sort of time jump thing. And so in the interim, we'd kind of make choices. We cut things down, and we'd learn where the story wanted to weave. And then the story's concluded. The characters hit their destinations, and it was a story about asylum. So the conclusion of it was the conclusion of an asylum case. So she got her answer, and the film ended.
And that was that.
That was that.
Bennett.
Yeah.
I'm going to totally change directions, because we've been talking about the production process. We've been talking about editorial choices and decisions. What about the business of filmmaking? How do distributors and investors influence the project?
It's a great question. We're obviously in a very chaotic time right now in terms of that kind of influence. At least from where I'm coming from, investors I'm usually seeing as collaborators and involving them as much as they want to be involved. I love anyone that wants to give me money for a project that can keep filming at any time. Distributors is a little bit trickier, because usually they're getting involved in my experience once something is already pretty done. But I would say that that's pretty collaborative as well.
How much influence does an investor have? Can they say, we don't like these two characters, we keep those two, cut these two out?
I think that the job of the producer is protecting the director and the project as much as you possibly can. And it's kind of a job to keep managing that opinion and that influence, and kind of considering how much weight it's going to take in a process, but really just trying to stay true to the project that you were trying to make the whole time.
And I'm asking these questions so that everybody gets the full transparency around
Totally.
how it works, because we don't work in bubbles, and it's not you go out in the field and you shoot what you want, and you bring it back and you put it out, and that's it. There's so many
Totally.
hands and influences, and we haven't even spoken about lawyers, which is a whole legal is a whole other level. We can get to that, I hope. Michael, what about social impact? How do you measure that? How do you know your film actually makes a difference or made a difference?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know if I know how much the film is actually changing minds, right? Like, I think we're all lucky to be in a position to be making, to be telling stories that matter and telling stories that that are important, particularly to certain communities, to marginal communities, or whoever it is. You know, for like, I think my goal as a producer is to just get as many eyes on the film as possible. And if I can do that, then I think I've succeeded, you know. I hope that the film can do more than that and, you know, is held up in this space of like, you see, this film changed everybody's mind, but, you know, that's pretty hard to measure. But yeah, like, you know, I think about The People's Way and what telling their story just means to that community. And, you know, again, when you have a national movement that happened and we're going so small as to just tell the story of these 3 activists in Minneapolis, you know, that in itself is powerful enough for me. You know, if their story can get out, that's enough for me. And hopefully, yeah, people can watch it and have a sense of what it means to fight for justice, what it means to be faced with some of the hardest stuff, you know, hardest pain, and go through it.
One last thing, and we'll go to Q&A. Eric, you already mentioned that you have a project coming out on Saturday?
Sunday.
Sunday on CNN. I'm just giving you all a chance to plug what's coming up.
Yes,
what we
please.
Should know. So, Eric?
Yes, Sunday at 9 p.m. It's a show called TV on the Edge. This is the 4th installment of this series. And it looks at TV moments that created a larger impact for American culture. So the first episode was about Murphy Brown versus Dan Quayle. The second episode was looked at Oprah the moment where she pulled out that big wagon of fat. We look at the conversation that has still continued to this day around weight in this country. Third episode was around Ellen coming out of the closet on her show and the ripple effect that has. And like I mentioned, this episode looks at Kanye's moment when he said George Bush doesn't care about black people. We parse and split up that moment. We talk to people that were in the room when it happened. And we get into this deeper conversation around how that was one of the first viral moments that had ever happened, how it was one of the first moments where someone had openly criticized a president, how the word of that moment spread. It was before Twitter and all of these things. Now it was almost like it's like a time capsule. And it really looks at nuance. I'm a big believer in nuance and what we try to do. And it's something that's very hard to do, especially at some of the bigger networks, because we can get into this side, that side space. But I think it's important in this moment, as much as we can, to look at how each of these individual instances meant something different to each individual person as much as we can. And it's a really great series. I'm not just plugging it because I EP'd it. It really is great. So take a look.
Thank you. And Michael?
Thanks.
Yes, I said it already, but The People's Way, it announces tomorrow. It will be showing in New York. Again, I can't say the festival because they haven't announced it yet, but they'll be announcing it tomorrow.
Can we guess?
I'm sure you can guess it's not that. It's Documentary Film Festival in New York. I think you know what I'm talking about. They're announcing tomorrow 2 p.m. and I would love for everybody everybody to come out and support. It's going to be playing at the Angelica Film
great.
Center. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Bennett, how about you?
I am just at the tail end of a theatrical run for a fiction film that I actually just had come out. We just finished up at the Quad, so I'm tired.
What's it
And
called? The name?
it's called The Featherweight, and it's directed by a professor from SVA, Rob Clodney, who is here. And I am in the middle of developing like 6 other documentary features. So if there are any billionaires in this audience that support nonfiction film, please hit me for the Q&A.
And you could be a
Billionaires.
millionaire too.
Yeah, I'll take
100,000 there.
Let's just let's go.
They'll
Got
give their
$5-10.
Venmo numbers at the end.
I'll take it.
Nat.
I just finished a film called Roads of Fire. It's about migration in the Western Hemisphere, a look at the $35 billion migrant smuggling industry, starting in Colombia up to the Darien Gap. And then it's a two-hander. It looks at that while telling a story of an asylum seeker here in the city. It's going to festivals. We'll be playing soon as well. And then I'm developing a new project about wildfires.
Wow.
We're
How
selling
timely.
that, so shout out billionaires and millionaires.
All right, so we're going to open up the floor now to questions. There should be 2 microphones. One here and one here. Just a couple of general rules. Students get priorities. Get prioritized, please. And if you're a student, tell us where you go to school, what you're studying, and keep in mind that a lot of people want to ask questions, so keep your questions tight. We don't really have time for speeches. Just ask your question, and then to the panel, let's try to have one person answer each time so we can get through as many. But if you want to add on, feel free. Sounds good?
Sounds great.
All right. Let's start on this side.
Hi, thank you all so much for speaking with us. My name is Arya. I recently graduated from New York University. I'm currently interning at Nightline, so hi, Eric, fellow Nightliner. So I come from a journalism background, and I know that documentary is sort of kind of in this intersection of journalism and filmmaking, and it feels like that line can shift depending on, the world of documentary that you're in. So I'm curious, what are some of the biggest differences, making documentaries for, let's say, for a network TV versus for a film festival? Like, how does the editorial change? How does your film change based on the business world that you're in?
Who wants to take that?
It's an interesting question. I think that the only real distinction in my mind between a journalist proper, in terms of somebody who is there to report a factual accounting of something, and a documentary filmmaking is the allowance in the storytelling to kind of move with the perspective, and to, I tend to look at a doc as a research paper. So it's like I walk in with a thesis, and whether I prove that thesis or not, I still have a perspective that I'm looking to interrogate. A journalist is there to try to completely remove that perspective, though that's obviously impossible, and report a factual accounting of something to whatever degree they can.
The funding changes the whole experience, because when you work for a news network, you don't have to worry about that.
Right.
You're given a budget, it's fixed, it's this much, you have a team, and you go out. But when you are independent, you are constantly hustling, like constantly looking for funding. And the other thing that's different is you can color outside of the lines when you're independent. And I think that's what you were getting. You can't when you work for a news network. These are the rules, do it this way. But sorry, go ahead.
Nope, that's exactly right. That's exactly what I was going to say.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Over here.
All right. Hi, my name is River. I am currently studying documentary at New York University. And my question is about point of view in making a film, because I feel like we have 2 scenarios we can be at. One is you're making a film that in a community you're familiar with, and one is like in a completely different, you're interacting with a completely different person. And for me right now, I'm editing my thesis, which is about a blind person who's very different from my upbringing. And I realized when I was editing that I had a very clear point of view during filming, but at the same time, I'm realizing it very late in the process that I can't change anything that I filmed. So I'm very curious about when you're making your films, what point of view be a discussion before you start production, and how can you also make your point of view to kind of add on this narrative instead of like being something weird in the storytelling, if that makes sense.
And where are you studying?
New York University.
Okay. So, it's really a question about your own personal bias and being conscious of your bias in capturing the story, and how you present it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have. You bring all of your stuff everywhere with you, and it sometimes, especially when you're just beginning as a journalist, you don't really know all the time that you're doing it. And it's good that you recognize, like, oh wow, especially when you rewatch stuff, I still do it. Like, I wish I had asked it differently, or why did I say it that way? You have to just recognize it. And I think I was always trained to like report against my own biases. Like, now I enjoy talking to people who are nothing like me, and I try to encourage my team, because we have a lot of folks. There's a lot of folks that I think in this moment can not cross the line, but don't understand that you do have to, that this is a job. Your job is to go cover this right now, and you got to kind of take yourself out of it. And I think the lesson is on the back end, you insert yourself, your POV, all of you into how you tell the story. When I watched the Kanye thing that's coming on Sunday, I feel like, that I got my Eric Johnson-ness into it. It's infused into how I worked with my team, and I hope that they feel like they got their personalities, the way they talk into, even if the characters are nothing like them, I still think that that's the whole fun of what we do, is you do want there to be a part of you that you leave in your work, because that's the fun of what we do. But I think there's a very thin line in that, in terms of going kind of overboard, but it's good to recognize that you do it. We all do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. My name is Lorelai. I recently graduated from Vassar College. And this question was based on something I think Bennett said and someone else about like intimacy and vulnerability, and how when you're producing and or directing, how you get people to talk about things that are intimate or vulnerable without like violating their boundaries and spaces, and getting them to talk for camera, which is especially, you have that right in your face. It's hard to talk about it.
Great question.
I think it takes a lot of time. I think that also post-COVID, it's been a little bit harder to spend. I spend so much time with participants without a camera there, but I feel like post-COVID, there's been like an urgency. Like, if you're in the space, you got to film the thing and you've got to like get in there. But I mean, I think for all the things that I produce, couples therapy included, it's really being upfront with the people I'm filming, right? Because I'm relying on them to be trusting me, and I trust them that it's going to be like a collaborative thing. So I don't know. I'm usually pretty upfront with anyone that wants to give me their time in what the process is going to be, and also often, like, if you don't want to do this, we're not going to do this. If you don't want to go there, we're not going to go there. I'm not here to make like a gotcha documentary. Like, it's really just treating all of the people that are giving me their time the way I would treat like anyone in my life, which sounds a little cheesy, but it's really just if people are going to give me their time and trust me to take care of them, then I'm going to do everything I can to protect them and make sure that they feel safe and seen, and we'll explore as far as they want to go.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I think both Michael and Nat have experiences around developing trust that you might want to share.
Yeah, so the first clip that I showed was from a film called Roberta, which is about Roberta Flack, who was a superstar in the 1970s. She made a song called "Killing Me Softly" and "If I Ever Saw Your Face."
It's a great doc.
Yeah,
It's a great doc.
And I made it with filmmaker Antonino D'Ambrosio, who is my filmmaking partner, who produces and also directs. And so when you're making a film about a singular person like that, you really have to develop trust. But you're sort of playing two sides. Because on one end, you want to tell you want to develop trust and make sure that they feel comfortable telling their story. On the other end, you're still a journalist, and you have to make sure that you're telling a truthful story. And sometimes that can come to a head because, somebody may not want something that's truthful about their lives being told. And what we did with the Roberta project is that we really, spent a lot of time. And we actually did during COVID. Well, a lot of it happened before COVID, which was helpful. We ended up shooting it during COVID. But yeah, like being able to really just spend a lot of time. I mean, we were, in her home. We have moments where she was just singing for us, playing. Yeah, I know.
Wow.
Wow, so cool.
Yeah,
Wow.
It's like one of the best projects, just for me personally. But yeah, but those moments actually mean something, and it wasn't just the director; it was the director, the producer. Sometimes it was our cinematographer, who we knew that he was going to be spending all this time with Roberta, so he also should be there. And so yeah, it's really, if you have the capacity to develop that relationship, that goes a long way. And so by the end, you're just, a camera is on and they're just talking and they're just telling us stories.
Yeah, I would just say, like, the relationship, it's the whole thing. Like, it's the entire thing. So I often, whether it's, an interview setup, you've got a camera like this one, you've got probably 2 or 3, if not more, mics buzzing over people's heads. It's an overwhelming thing, and it's a vulnerable thing. I always say in an interview context, but by the time you're in an interview with me, we've spent a ton of time talking. No camera, nothing, just like speaking and making sure that there's an understanding. But then even in that situation, when the camera's rolling, when we're sitting up here with mics, whatever, saying to the person in front of the camera, like, it's just you and me, but it's also, you can look into the camera, you can look into that camera, you can look into that camera, you can talk to Ernesto, who's doing the sound, you can talk to Braulio, who's shooting camera B, you can talk to all of us. We're here in this room because you've given us yourself, and you've opened the window into yourself, to your life. So it's a privilege for us, and we're here just to give you a microphone. So starting there, it's the whole thing is that relationship, and making sure they understand that this is an opportunity for them to tell their narrative, to guide their narrative, and that it's not a situation where they're being forced in front of a camera to just, have something manipulated and sold. It's you're working with them and they're working with you, and it's a complete handshake relationship that has to be honored.
We're going to go to the next question. Thank you. And just one observation, since I do remember, as you were talking about it, the Roberta Flack film, when you watch it, there is another trust element to it, and it's good to watch to see how this was handled. But Roberta Flack isn't in good health, and she's quite ill. And you don't realize it till the film is almost over. So it's great to watch it to see how they as filmmakers address that, because if you had seen that at the beginning, it might have been a little distracting. So take a look at the film to see what technique they used to deal with that, because that's also a trust issue, I'm sure. Next question.
Hi, my name is Gabriella. I go to Brooklyn College. I study television, radio, and emerging media. That's the long name. I have been interested in documentaries and nonfiction, just media, for a long time. And I think my question, particularly for you, but this is open to everybody, what would make a good documentary pitch, and what draws you to a certain concept? How do you pitch that and make that a reality?
When you said a good question for you, who are you?
Sorry, Eric.
Okay, Eric.
I think that there's 1,000 ways to answer like what would make a good doc pitch, and there's 1,000 different types of documentaries. There are verite docs that require a certain degree of access, something that feels like only you could get into that space. Those are my favorite type of documentaries. There are documentaries that, again, access to a specific booking, somebody who's well known, who might be willing to tell their story again to you as the filmmaker. There are documentaries that CNN does that are more archival based, documentaries about specific themes around, specific, like Giuliani or bigger picture thing. I think my big thing for all documentaries is you want to find a way to tell a bigger story. This is my personal belief. You want to find access to a bigger narrative. Like when I was at ABC, I was on Diane Sawyer's producing team for like a couple years, which was like the thrill of my life. And I was one of the producers on at the time, the Bruce Jenner transition. She had booked it. It was a 2-hour special. We were like, how are we going to do 2 hours on Bruce Jenner and Kardashian? And like thinking that the approach was going to be this poppy thing. And she wanted to tell the story about the trans community. We can say what we want about Caitlyn Jenner, about Bruce Jenner, etc. The bigger takeaway from that special was a bigger takeaway about a wider community. And we got, and Bruce Jenner at the time was the needle point to get into that wider story. And I think a lot of people, our hope were affected, good or bad, in terms of your own beliefs by the way that we introduced that topic to them. And so that for me is what makes the best pitch.
Yeah, and we could go for a whole hour on just pitching. The one thing I would add is know your audience. Like if you're pitching to a network or you're pitching to PBS American Experience or you're pitching independently to film festivals, they want different things. So know where the story you're making fits and pitch to the right place.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Zaria and I'm studying at St. Francis College. I'm studying digital media. I'm actually interested in fiction films, and I know, Bennett, you mentioned that you recently directed or produced a fiction film. I wanted to ask, what are the major differences between nonfiction and fiction? Because even though I'm interested in fiction, I'm also open to many different forms of media. And my goal is to be a director. So what would you say are the major differences between the two?
Thank you. Scripted or non-scripted?
Oh my God, scripted all day, every day. I think it's both are beautiful creative processes. I think scripted sometimes you're not really convincing anyone to show up, right? Like there are actors that say things that have been written, which is amazing. I think scripted projects, just the basis of like how a crew works, there's like 9 to 12 people that do all of the jobs that I do as one producer on a documentary project. The fiction film that I had mentioned before, I should say, is shot as if it was a documentary. It's about a real boxer in the 1960s, and as the conceit is, he's being followed by like a Maisels level documentary crew as he's mounting a comeback. So much of my work is kind of the nexus of fiction on top of nonfiction, and this film was just a scripted way to kind of explore that by using nonfiction language. I think both formats have a lot of different ways to explore and figure things out as you go along. And I could talk all day about the benefits of both. But fiction, there's more of a guarantee that you're going to stick to the plan that you started the day with than if you're in the field shooting a documentary.
That's true.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, my name is Preetha. I'm a graduate student at NYU's Steinhardt studying media, culture, and communication. I'm also an event intern for Center for Communication. So I'm also in the midst of shooting a music-related documentary short for my final project. And making a documentary on, let's say, like a news event or even a person, it involves a lot of research or a lot of homework, as I like to call it. Considering that there are so many moments within a person or a news event, a person's life or a news event, how do you know which moment to feature and which not to?
Yes. I can talk
Who wants
about
to tackle that? Okay, Michael.
Yeah, I mean that was the exact problem we had with Roberta, and one of the things that I feel like we have to mention more is the power of editors, and how they can, especially in documentary film, they are the most, sorry directors, the most important person on a a project, because they can start to answer those questions. So like, Nathaniel talked about shooting and editing at the same time. Oftentimes your deadline forces you to do that. With Roberta, we were able to we did have a decent deadline, but we did have time to explore all of these different themes in her life, and really, the film that we our rough draft was very different from our final. We had some things that we definitely wanted to do. We were telling the story in all archival, which is part of what Geraldine, did I say your name right?
Mm-hmm.
Geraldine was talking about, where you don't get to see Roberta until all the way at the end of the film. So you see her in archival throughout the whole film. So we had some rules that we wanted, but we didn't know where are we going to focus the story. And really, particularly with documentary, what you end up doing is that you have a lot of scenes, you watch them all, and then you start to peel away. And in that, you'll find what the story is of this person. Most likely, it's not going to be where you started.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Leah Letterman. I am studying film media production and digital journalism at Marymount Manhattan. My question is, as a student filmmaker who wants to make documentaries that matter, like we had for this panel, how do you get people to say yes to talking to you? What is the strategies that you use? Because most of the time we're interviewing people who are activists or have much more important lives than ourselves. And what is a strategy for you to basically say, I can help your cause, and introduce yourself from the get-go?
I think we probably all have a bunch of answers on this. I think for me, just having confidence in yourself as the person making that phone call. Like, the first job for me in journalism was, and it's like the first job any intern gets, is MOS. You have to like go out.
MOS is man on the street.
Like,
Can you talk to me about it? Can you talk to me about it?
and people are like, get away, and it's awful. It's complete. I used to like get so much anxiety. I would hide, like go to this storm and drive up, and then the producer would never use it. And I was like, well, this is terrible. But you learn, it's a hazing, but you got to learn how to talk to people. And over time, you stop caring when people don't want to talk. You're like, they don't want to talk to me. I don't care. You kind of just turn into like you just take that part of yourself out that's embarrassed or shy. And then the other side is, over time, I really do believe this. I think most people like to talk about themselves. Like, on camera, off camera. I don't think any of us would have jobs or careers if people clammed up. I think people, if you're comfortable, they'll be comfortable. Every now and again, I have been shocked by how sometimes you're like, you should not, you're going down a rabbit hole and you're giving me stuff that you probably shouldn't say. But like, it's, people like to talk. Yeah. And so just trust in that part. This profession has been around for quite a while. Everybody has phones now, but like, trust in yourself to be able to go and practice. Again, practice talking to people that don't look like you. Just seeing like, at a wedding, I'm serious. Like, it's part of what, if you really want to get into this space, you got to practice talking to people.
Talking to strangers.
Yeah.
We're going to run out of time. We have about 10 minutes. So, and I want to get through as many of your questions as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, I'll keep it very brief. Hi, I'm Brandon Smith. I'm also, I work in the documentary film space as a producer. Currently 2 projects in post. Mine is about decks and just how do you, what are some strategies or suggestions for a good documentary pitch deck, especially if you don't have, a video to show any of the investors. Just curious.
Tricky. Make them, be focused. I think that's the best thing I can say is from a perspective of like, it is a sales document, but it's also, if you kind of key into it, you can use it as a guide, a sort of North Star for yourself. So as you're building the deck, you can kind of start to find, all right, this is actually what this film wants to be. And as you're sort of like, I would recommend doing like 20 slides, one of which is like a context slide, and then a synopsis, and just go word diarrhea and just blast it all out, seriously. And then as you're doing that, you're going to start to your brain is going to start to key in on the things that you're actually interested in. And that becomes the DNA of what your deck is. So then that context thing gets much shorter, and you're like, oh, so this is about this. And this is what I want to talk about. And here are the subjects that I'm interested in talking about. So be really clear, concise, and people say you have to like get really flashy to the decks. You don't always have to.
But I also think to the word diarrhea part, I would say people hate reading. And
Sure.
if you haven't shot anything yet, if you're that early and that's how you're pitching, any kind of visual references, anything that kind of looks like how you're hoping the film to look like, or anything. I think images are great if you don't have the video material yet.
Style guide.
But yes,
Yeah,
everything.
style guide. Yeah.
Yes.
And keep in mind, you can always change your deck. You can upgrade it after a conversation with someone and realize something was missing. So you will change your deck again and again and again, and you can tailor it to your audience.
Hundreds of
Right?
drafts.
Yeah.
So there are many versions of your deck. Great question. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, my name is Leo. I'm a student at SVA studying PFA film. And I'm interested in narrative filmmaking and documentary filmmaking. And I wanted to know if you think there's any overlap between them, if there's anything that you as documentary filmmakers draw from narrative filmmaking as far as the construction of a story, how you think you're going to construct it with the final cut, or if there's any aspects of documentary filmmaking that you think a narrative filmmaker can draw from in the construction of their own stories.
Is Bennett the only one who's done scripted?
I've done scripted.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, what came to mind is very specific, so sorry about that. But I think one of the big things with documentary film is that you don't get to control everything, right? With scripted, you'll have your lights controlled, you'll have your set controlled for the most part. And one thing I think that scripted films can get from documentary is just using what is out there, to tell your story. So, and I think, and very specifically, I'm thinking about lighting. Like, you can do more with a set that is, whether it's like a street or whatever, and you can do more with lighting, with natural lighting. And I think for documentary, let's see, what have I taken away from scripted? I think character development is one of the things, right? It's like even when you haven't written a script of what somebody's saying, you still have to develop the character, and so and that's one thing that I think scripted, like when you're writing a script, that's like one of the things that you're really that you really have an idea of, and you can take some of the tips from narrative and use that in documentaries.
I think the biggest overlap is that whether it's a documentary or a fiction film, it's the element of performance is huge. Even if it's a documentary, everyone is different when you put a camera on them. So it's kind of that, I think, applies across the board, whether you're working with actors or with real participants. I think that's like the biggest thing that no matter what medium you're trying to make a film in, that is kind of inevitable.
Thank you. We have three left, 3 questions.
Hi guys, I'm Fiona. I'm a senior at NYU studying global media, culture, and communications. My question is, how do you make documentaries that especially deal with a darker matter more presentable for the average viewer, especially if you want them to enact on that issue in the future? Like I'm thinking about like climate change, for example.
Who wants to take
that? so in other words, how to make a subject matter approachable, or
like thinking of your target audience, like you want to increase viewership, right? So it's like, how do you create, like for example, for you dealing with the Ukrainian refugees, it's a very dark topic, but how do you either in editing or whatever just make the topic a little, I mean, it's bad to say, but like a little more lighthearted I guess I don't know, for more people to see it
I hear
without
you.
being like,
I
oh
hear
my
you.
god, this is awesome.
So I think that the first thing I would think about is universality. You're telling a story about people, and think about from a viewer perspective, being beaten to death with grim horror. First off, it teeters into exploitation a little bit. You got to be very aware of that. So it's like when you're doing something about war, blasting people with a rapid fire slideshow of images of death is gonna diminish the point that you're trying to make. The point that you're trying to make is something about the human experience. So really, it low key it goes back to sort of that conversation about trust and about relationships. It's about your relationship with the people that you're making your film about. And in my experience, when you open that door of trust and of relationship, it's very compelling, and the people who watch are immediately going to key into the truth of what's being told to you. So yeah, I think trust your subjects and let the story be what it is, and don't try to manipulate it based on conventions that don't need to be there. Like, people watch a film because of people, and people are there to learn, to listen to each other.
But also, not every film's a blockbuster. And if we
Correct.
were expecting every single film to have like massive audiences, we'd have so few films. So trust your project. I agree.
Yeah. Also, in every sort of very dark story, like as you described, there's humans behind that, right? And so, like, one example in The People's Way, one of the women that's one of the main characters of the film, she had a very hard thing happen to her. Her partner was murdered by police, and while we followed her for months upon months, it's not like she never laughed. It's not like she never made a joke. And those are actually the moments that you want to mix in with some of the hard stuff, right? So, like, yeah, we know what her story is. It is tragic. It's terrible. But she also laughs because why? Because she's human. And if you're able to capture that, climate activists are taking on some of the hardest stuff, and it's hard, but they are also laughing and having fun while they're doing it. And so being able to find those moments also helps.
Yeah, I would just add just to the Ukrainian film to piggyback off of that, because that is so colossally true. And to the idea of, like, you're spending time with people. And people are idiots and laugh and make jokes all the time. That film was about the mental health impact on Ukrainian refugees fleeing war, but they're also 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds. And so it was chaos, and they were ridiculous and hilarious and heartbreaking and all of these things. So just embracing who people actually are and sort of letting that guide you, I think.
Thank you. Great question. I made a doc once about a kid who was 19 and he had cancer, and it was called Until 20. He dies at 20. Like the film title gives away the story, but the thing was, we weren't trying to make a film that was for everybody. It was a film for people who really wanted to know about his experience in his life, and it did well. So just know your audience, and yeah, it'll do fine.
Hey everybody, my name is Romel. I'm a filmmaker. I recently had a chance to DP a Wu-Tang documentary, and now I'm producing a documentary that kind of mirrors the format of Roberta, where coming up, we just have a bunch of interviews. And so my question was to Michael, is there like any advice to anticipate certain story elements, that might just happen or.
Yeah, I mean, when you're relying solely on archival footage, there's a certain challenge there. First of all, like, there's many times where I was like, can we just show the talking head? Like, we actually recorded all of the interviews, and like, my director Antonino, like, he was like, no, this is how we're gonna do it. And I think what I learned off of that project is one, gather everything. Like, have a lot of footage, have like archival footage that you may not even think will be associated with your story, but you still want to bring all that stuff in. And then, allow, obviously you do something like a radio edit, like, which is a radio edit is just all the audio and the music. And so allow yourself time to just sit with the radio edit and get that right, and then think about some of the visuals to put on top. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
No, yeah, sure, yeah. Antonino still owes me dinner, so.
Oh,
I want to also just compliment.
Dang, I'll let him know. I'll let him know.
Thank you.
I also want to compliment your question for framing Wu-Tang doc as like a genre. It's like a Wu-Tang doc. It is Wu-Tang.
Okay, last question.
Hi, my name is Eliona. I recently graduated from NYU's video journalism program and finished my thesis documentary on Russian young journalists. And moving forward, I am tapping slowly into productions and joining other teams, contributing. So I had a question for you onto how do you personally approach finding new members of the team when it comes to production assistant and videographers? And what advice would you have for people who recently graduated and entering the field onto like platforms to look at or places to hang out at?
I would say the biggest advice, and this is advice for anybody who wants to get deeper into this field, is to, first of all, come to things like this, put yourself out there, talk to people, send cold emails, email other journalists that you're interested in. People will respond to you. They really will. Get advice from people, and send, like, literally hit people up, out of nowhere. And I think honestly, somebody said, I forget who, like, you want to hire people that work hard, that have empathy, and that it's so exciting to be among so many people that want to be journalists, want to be documentarians. And so just continue to put yourself out there. It's simple advice, but.
Thank you. We're going to go back to Cami now, but before we do, I just wanted to say to everybody who asked the questions, your questions were great, like really smart questions. And as panelists, you guys were phenomenal. Thank you. And thank you to the Center for Communication in the Mayor's Office. And Cami's going to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Big. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us. I had great, amazing questions. I really enjoyed learning from all of you. And thank you again to our panelists for being here and sharing so many amazing insights. Let's end it up with another big round of applause. And I hope to see you again